sit down there, Nigel.
Very kind of you, Lee. Very kind of you. Good afternoon, everybody. I have for over 25 years in Who's Who, under hobbies and recreations, listed proper pubs. So I think this is a subject about which I can speak with some degree of knowledge. The pub does matter, and every pub's a parliament is a phrase that I came up with 25 years ago. Amazing how in a pub you can have a firm opinion, and someone says, well, hang on a second, have you looked at it like this? And you might change your view by 180 degrees. What is happening to our pubs, what is happening to our hospitality sector is little short of a disaster. They're on the edge of falling off a cliff. It's serious. It's very, very serious. And it isn't just the Reeves budgets. Of course, this does go back to swinging increases in beer duty that happened especially in Jeremy Hunt's time. Yes, there are cultural changes. Yes, there are fewer young people drinking alcohol regularly. But they're drinking other brands. They're drinking low alcohol. They're drinking zero alcohol. And there is little doubt that certainly in small town, small village Britain, when pubs close, it is a social disaster for the community. So we've tried here to put forward some quite sensible proposals. If you just think about it, VAT going down to 10%, allied to a 10% cut in beer duty, would be 44p of a pint of beer before you even begin. Average price probably of a pint of beer at the moment, around about £4.80. But actually we go further with this, with changes to regulation, with the gradual phasing out of business rates. I would think within 2 to 3 years these measures would take £1 off every pint, which does at least begin to bring back some degree of competitiveness against the supermarkets. But the other killer for pubs, of course, given that many are pretty drafty old buildings, is energy bills. Energy bills have closed as many pubs in the last 5 years as any other factor. And the net zero lunacy that we were taken down by the Conservatives and now being followed by a level of fanaticism, I think is the only way I can possibly describe Miliband's feelings towards the subject, is something else that a reform government, by getting rid of all of the artificial subsidies, would yet further help our pubs and indeed our broader hospitality sector. The national insurance increases. We're now told that the Chancellor, despite her 10 years as a very senior economist at the Bank of England, didn't understand what the knock-on effects would be. And certainly bringing down the national insurance level to £5,000 a year has put paid to tens of thousands of young people getting those part-time jobs they want when they're students at university or younger than that. So this is a constructive, costed plan. Yes, it means getting rid of the proposed legislation from the Labour government on the two-child cap. It is reducing the benefits bill in favour of encouraging private enterprise and jobs and wealth creation. And that, I think, is perhaps a snapshot of what you'll see more broadly in terms of economic policy coming out of reform over the course of the next months and years. The public sector, the welfare bill, cannot go on rising unless we start to create more wealth. This plan already has been welcomed by some quite senior figures in the pub. And don't forget the brewing industry. Dozens of small breweries closed around the United Kingdom last year. And if we can keep more pubs open, it will be a social good for the United Kingdom. Now, I've got a list of questions here. I suspect that pubs won't be the only item on the agenda today. I could be wrong, of course. Let's start with Ben Wright from the BBC.
Thank you.
Is there a microphone? There is.
Sorry, Thank you very much, Mr. Farage. Yes, on the story of the day, Lord Mandelson, government say that they want to introduce legislation to strip him of his title, to remove him from the Lords. What do you think about that? Will reforms support it? And moves more broadly to remove miscreant peers from the House of Lords? And secondly, why should taxpayers subsidise failing pubs because people are drinking less?
Well, it wouldn't be taxpayers subsidising it directly, would it? I mean, reducing taxation is not a subsidy. Tax is a tax. what we're doing is reducing the welfare bill in order to create private enterprise, jobs, wealth creation, people paying more tax, let alone the social benefits from it. As I understand it, the last time that titles were removed by Act of Parliament was around about the time of the First World War, when there were some supporting the other side. To me, getting rid of his title as Lord and one or two other miscreant peers, fine. But it's not the issue of the day. It absolutely is not the issue of the day. The issue of the day is that not only did this man breach cabinet confidentiality, but he leaked highly market-sensitive information. Let me tell you, when I was in the European Parliament and I was talking about the bond spreads, the width of bond spreads between Greece, Italy and Germany, when those bailouts happened, there was a massive, immediate market shift. I watched it. It was huge. Anybody that had that information, that had access to money and funds of the kind that Epstein did, well, if he made tens of millions out of it, he was lax. Because there was a chance to make hundreds of millions out of that trade. So quick was the shift in the bond spreads. That, it seems to me, must be bordering on criminal. There is no direct insider trading law for bonds in quite the same way that there is for stocks, and that's been the case since 1981, the Insider Trading Act. But it is highly sensitive market information. It is government secrets. I also wonder whether, in emails to Epstein, he talked about the security apparatus that exists underneath number 10 and at the heart of Whitehall. That is information that is of national security importance. And so I think there is reason to ask the question whether Mandelson has not broken the Official Secrets Act. And I'd like to know whether Lord Hermer will be happy and satisfied for a prosecution to proceed on that basis. I think it's that serious. So, fine, talk about removing the title, but that really is, I think, a very small part of something that is much bigger, much more serious. And I'm not even sure that we know the full story yet. By the way, my name was mentioned 37 times in the files, but just to repeat, I never met Epstein and I didn't go to the island. OK, let's go on to Catherine Forster, GB News.
Thank you. Catherine Forster, GB News. On Mandelson, again, the Prime Minister says that he has let his country down. How would you describe all of the behaviour that he's taken part in that we now know of? And the actions that the Prime Minister is now taking, are they going to be sufficient for getting him and number 10 out of trouble on this?
No, I don't think they are. I mean, look, the warnings were there, weren't they? The warnings were there. We go back to the mortgage. We go back to the Hinduja passport application. We go back at a time when he was Trade Minister and when the only part of the world that charged tariffs on base metals were the European Union, with its 7% import tax on aluminium coming, in this case, out of Russia. And there he is on Deripaska's yacht, shortly before the tariffs change. I mean, how many more warnings? How many more warnings did the Prime Minister, or indeed Morgan McSweeney, need? They have made a grave, grave error of judgment, despite repeated warnings. And, this all comes at a time when you've got a Labour MP who's been sentenced to another 4 years in prison by a foreign court, a Labour MP arrested again and charged on some incredibly serious crimes. And, in politics, you will always get the odd bad apple in a political party. But it would appear that in the case right now of this Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff, their errors of judgment, partly their errors of judgment, have led now to case after case after case. Difficult for somebody who was already the most unpopular Prime Minister in living memory. This deals yet a further blow. And so I still stick to the view that after May the 7th, when you see, in Wales, for example, Labour that's dominated the place, going right back to Keir Hardie's time. Very difficult for me to think that Starmer will survive the summer if he even gets through to May the 7th. Alexander Rogers from Sky News.
Nigel Farage, if you were Keir Starmer dealing with these latest revelations from Peter Mandelson, who would you blame for his appointment? And should someone lose their job over this, and if so, who?
Well, it's always the bloke at the top in the end that has to take responsibility, even if it's not his or her fault. I mean, that's just the way it works in business, in politics. I mean, obviously we don't know what the MI6 report that the Prime Minister received, or did he receive, did he ask for it before the appointment as ambassador to America. We don't know the details of that. But ultimately, I would have thought that the Labour backbenchers, who are moving quite rapidly to the left in terms of their centre of gravity, will be demanding that McSweeney goes within the next few days. Perhaps it'll take a week. And you'll know, as soon as McSweeney goes, that Starmer won't last long afterwards. That would be my take and my judgment. Ultimately, given, as I said a moment ago, all the previous warnings about Mandelson's behaviour, it is a grave error of judgment on behalf of the Prime Minister. And I think that's inescapable now. OK, let's move on to Francis Reed, Channel 4.
Thank you. Francis Reed, Channel 4 News. Mr Farage, in an email exchange in the latest Epstein files, Steve Bannon reveals that he is an advisor to the AfD, Orban, Salvini and you. Do you think that's an accurate description of your relationship with him? That's the first question. And secondly, the government has said there's a broader need for the House of Lords to be able to swiftly remove transgressors. What does that look like under you? What would you do about it?
Yeah, look, clearly it's very outdated that we have to go back to the First World War to see the time that this particular piece of legislation was enacted. There ought to be a swifter, easier, quicker way to remove peers of their title if they've been found guilty and sent to prison, for argument's sake. So, yeah, constitutionally, perhaps something needs to change, but I repeat the point. I don't think it's the main issue of the day. Whether someone's called Lord this or not doesn't, frankly, compared to the gravity of what we're talking about, I don't think it really matters. I've known Steve Bannon since 2012 or 13, I can't remember. Probably 2012, I think, and he attended an event I spoke at in East Anglia. I've met him many times since, including when he was in the West Wing, in the first Trump, briefly in the West Wing, in the first Trump term. I know Steve, I listen to Steve, I agree with Steve sometimes, I disagree fundamentally with Steve at other times. I always listen to what he says, as indeed does a lot of the Conservative movement. But this period in 2018 was he sort of saw himself as the granddaddy of the populist wave across Europe. But we've never had any formal engagement or relationship of any kind. I mean, frankly, somebody I meet in a pub, let's bring it back to pubs, shall we? Someone I meet in a pub can give me a suggestion and go say that they've acted as an advisor to me. So I wouldn't take it any more seriously than that. But, he's not somebody, whether you like him or not, he's not someone to be underestimated. Let us go to Rhys Williams, ITV News.
Mr Farage, you offered to work with Peter Mandelson when he was made US ambassador to try to get a good trade deal with the US, despite all of the suspicions that you had. Does that say anything about your judgment?
Well, he wasn't my choice of ambassador. I thought there was somebody eminently more qualified to be ambassador. Somebody who could have walked through the door of the Oval Office, having a personal relationship with the President. Not just the President, but indeed over half the Cabinet, who were personal friends. And I thought that person would have been far more suitable in terms of negotiating good deals for us on trade, but perhaps also pushing back on elements of foreign policy that America was uttering that we were not in agreement with, be that Canada or whatever else it may be. I suspect if that person had been there, we wouldn't have seen the Chagos surrender, which of course will be the next big U-turn. That person who's well known to me wasn't chosen, which I think is a great shame. personally. He was there. Starmer was in number 10. I didn't like that either. But I did say to the Prime Minister, if I can help you with anything, with the relationship with Trump or any of the administration, I will do so because it's in the national interest. And that's what I said at the time, and I meant it sincerely. Thank you. Let's go on. Tim Stanley from the Daily T.
Hi, hello. Nigel, our readers will be delighted by everything you've said about pubs this afternoon. Thank you so much, because we've been running the Save Our Pubs campaign. It's great stuff, but I'm going to have to ask you about Mandy. I'm sorry.
I thought it was all about pubs today. It's so disappointing. It really is.
First question, picking up on what you said about all the warnings were there with Mandelson. He'd been in government twice before and sacked, still hired by Gordon Brown, still then hired by Keir Starmer. How do you account for Peter Mandelson constantly returning to Labour and working for it? How can you explain the strange appeal of this man? And second question, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has just been reported to the police for alleged sex trafficking. Do you think that's an appropriate course of action?
I think for the royal family, what started off as an embarrassment is rapidly turning into a disaster. And perhaps it's the biggest scandal to engulf the royals since 1936. Very, very serious. Look, the only answer I can give you to your specific question is if that is if there is a genuine justification for making that complaint and it's not vexatious, there is no reason why his treatment by the law should not be exactly the same as all the rest of us. And I think the country would agree with that absolutely overwhelmingly. But yes, the King has acted relatively quickly on all of this, and thank goodness, frankly, that he did. As to whether much more is going to come out, just who knows? Mandelson, what's the appeal? How is it that he sort of says, look into my eyes, I want to be back in the cabinet, I want to be ambassador? He's very articulate, he's highly intelligent, he's incredibly well briefed, probably the best networker in Westminster in the last 30 years. There isn't a telephone number of note that somehow isn't on Mandy's list, and I think he's able, when he talks to people, to give them the impression that he knows more about what's happening in the world, more about any particular subject than perhaps anybody else they can appoint. So, and the funny thing is, it's not all a con job. It's not all bull. He genuinely is incredibly well briefed. I watched him as Trade Commissioner, and yes, he was on Deripaska's yacht, but the actual subject, the brief, even at his hearing, I'd never heard anybody as impressive in all my 20 years in the European Parliament. The guy is very, very bright, but clearly has a taste for money and has a taste for bad company. So, there is this sort of almost bewitching appeal. But, you can forgive a friend, you can forgive a family member, you can forgive a party colleague one big mistake in their lives, and we all do it. And actually, in the spirit of Christian forgiveness, we should do it. But if we start trusting repeat offenders, they're not the idiots we are. Thank you. Let us move on to Christian, Calgary Express.
Hello. So I think you might be right about the frothy issue of the peerage, but on the issue of Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney's judgment, we believe that tomorrow the Conservatives will use an opposition day motion to try and force the government to publish any vetting and advice that they gathered. Some Labour MPs reportedly thinking of backing that motion. Would you and your MPs look at backing that motion? And on the issue of pubs, would you say that morally a reform government would be almost sort of pro-booze in a way that other governments have failed to be?
That's a very tough question for me to defend, isn't it, really? Although Lee did introduce me as a moderate to light drinker. It's all about definitions, I suppose, isn't it? Although I think the World Health Organization now say that the safe alcohol limit is 0, which is yet another reason for leaving the WHO as quickly as we possibly can. I think that would be a very, very good idea. Look, it's nice to know that the Conservative Party is still capable of the odd good idea. So I think we probably is. I think we would support that. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned this earlier on. What was the advice? What did come back from MI6 or whoever it was? Was the job done properly? Did they just decide to rush it through? I mean, clearly Morgan McSweeney is very, very much as tied into this as the Prime Minister. Hence my speculation that if more and more comes out and it gets worse and worse, Starmer will make McSweeney the sacrificial lamb, which in the end will seal his own fate as well. Lucky Andy Burnham's not standing in the by-election, isn't it? OK, we've got some more questions. We've got Claire Ellicott from the Daily Mail.
Thank you. Should Lord Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor be made to testify before Congress? Thanks.
Well, they can't be forced to, is the first point. The second point is, when you testify before Congress, it's real. I did it back in the autumn over the free speech issue, and you're there, and your hand is on the Bible or whatever particular book you choose, and you swear it. I mean, you are effectively in a courtroom. I'd love to see the Palace of Westminster and our committees turn back into being that, because that building does have the ability to turn itself into a court. We get much more scrutiny of government ministers and government decisions if we did that. We can't force them to go, but I think in the case of in the case of Andrew, if he doesn't go, he'd probably never be able to show his face in public again. It's probably the only chance he's got, to some degree, at least I think, to clear his name, unless there are things that happen that we don't know about and that are incredibly grave. But if Andrew believes that, his judgment was flawed, he did things he shouldn't have done, but they weren't coercive, they weren't outside the law, if he believes those things, then he ought to go for his own sake and testify. Otherwise, he's going to be stuck at Marsh Farm, or probably more likely living in the Middle East, never to be seen again. So I think, from his perspective, he absolutely should do it. I don't really see Lord Mandelson volunteering for it somehow. Martina Bett from The Sun.
Thank you, Nigel.